7:18. So this is right at the beginning of Parashat Emor. None of the priests, none of Aaron or Aaron's kin shall defile themselves for a dead person among them. On page 718, it is important to just note that extends to the ways in which the priests must act in front of the community. So they shouldn't shave smooth any parts of their heads. They shouldn't cut the side growth of their beards. They should be holy. They should be holy to their God and not profane the name of their God. For they offer the Lord's gifts, the food of their God, and so they must be holy. They must be holy. Look, and then it goes on to say we have to treat them that way. Go down, so here's where this is what I want to show you and why I wanted you to have this book in front of you. On the page of the Eitz Chaim, there are 2 to 3 commentaries. There's right under the text itself, the first word of that commentary in English says Torah, a priest is not permitted. That commentary is taken from the JPS commentary. It's a condensed version of the JPS commentary, the Jewish Publication Society, the most widely used academic commentary on the Torah available. Then beneath that line, and then at the bottom of the page there's Jewish law. Oftentimes, you will always see it sort of in a gray box. The line that has 8, you must treat them as holy. You see that line? Okay, I'm going to read this. Rabbis and cantors are no different from other Jews. I tried to demonstrate that for you already this morning. They have no special powers. False. No obligations devolve on them that do not apply to all Jews. 10 shoemakers can make a minyan, but 9 rabbis can't. Nonetheless, they are considered klei kodesh, instruments of holiness, because through their knowledge and teaching and by life, character, and commitments, they show the way to a life of holiness. Now, it can be both absolutely normal and special all at once. That's every single person in this room. Each one of us. 2 things at once. Okay, anybody know who wrote that commentary? I was like 4 when this thing came out. No, I wasn't actually. I was in medical school. Anybody know who wrote it? Harold Kushner. Rabbi Harold Kushner, Zichrono Livracha. His funeral was on Monday. Harold Kushner. There may not be another human being more responsible for changing the way all religious people who are not fundamentalists talk about God. In 1981, he wrote a book called, what's the title of his most famous book?
When?
Sarah, louder. When bad things happen to good people. When. He wasn't talking about why. It's a given that bad things happen to good people. Okay, anyway, this copy, this is a first edition. When I was cleaning out my mom's stuff, I found it. But the inscription says, "To the Hearst family, with my best wishes, Harold Kushner," which means it was likely given to my dad shortly after his first wife died, when we, my siblings, step-siblings, were 10, and his first wife was in her early 30s. This book is a treasure to me. Rabbi Jack Reamer, who gave a eulogy at Rabbi Kushner's funeral, who's a rabbi in South Florida, a rabbi's rabbi, he said, he's helped on the commentary. He said, "I remember the day very clearly. A number of us had been asked to work on the new Torah commentary that is found in almost every conservative synagogue today. We struggled with the task of writing a commentary on the Torah that would contain the words of the sages, and we failed. We floundered around for many months and we just couldn't do it. Somehow our work turned out to be boring and lifeless. And so we turned to Harold and we asked him to write a commentary that would bring together the words of the sages on the Torah in a way that would speak to this new generation. That's the commentary underneath the line. And at the same time, we called upon a certain other famous writer to be editor of this book. As he signed his contract, this writer turned to Harold and he said, you know, taking on this project is going to cost each of us a book of our own that we could have had the time and strength to write if we had not taken this on. And Harold turned to the writer and said, so? Harold said that if this turned out to be the last book he ever wrote, and that even if all the books that he had written in his lifetime were forgotten, he would be satisfied if he could enable the words of the sages down through the centuries to continue to speak to a new generation. He loved the words of the sages. When you open Eitz Chaim and read the commentary beneath the line, remember that you are reading Rabbi Harold Kushner, who loved the words of the sages and would have been happy were this his last book, and he wrote about 4 more. Who is he? Who was he? In his words, my spiritual life, what I believe, teach, and practice, has been shaped in large measure by 2 sets of circumstances. The first was the home I grew up in and the synagogue my family and I attended. I would describe the religion practiced in my home as observant, but not compulsive. Raise your hand if that identifies you. When we lit the Sabbath candles on Friday night or observed the traditional dietary rules about permitted and forbidden foods, I never had the sense that we were obeying a command from God who would be displeased with us if we had not done those things. Nor did we obsess about the consequences of our inadvertently making a mistake. Rather, we felt we were making a statement about who we were as a family. And although I don't think the word would have occurred to any of us, we were bringing a measure of holiness into an ordinary middle-class home, turning mundane moments into appointments with God. Observant, but not compulsive. The second circumstance that shaped my religious outlook was the illness and death of our son, Aaron, from one of the world's rarest diseases, progeria, the rapid aging syndrome. As I chronicled in my book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People, it was in the presence of my sick and dying child that I discovered how inadequate the traditional perspective was that I had grown up with and had been taught. That God has God's reasons, which we cannot comprehend or judge. It neither made sense of the suffering, nor offered us much in the way of comfort. If I was to continue to serve as a rabbi and to honor my son's memory, I would have to find a better explanation. And that's what he did for the rest of his life. He found and then articulated in word and writing better explanations. Here's a few of them. The conventional explanation that God sends us the burden because God knows that we are strong enough to handle it. Have you heard that one before? Yes. Has it all wrong. He wrote this in 81. Fate, not God, sends us the problem. When we try to deal with it, we find out that we are not strong. We are weak, we get tired, we get angry and overwhelmed. We begin to wonder how we will ever make it through all the years. But when we reach the limits of our own strength and courage, something unexpected happens. We find reinforcement coming from a source outside of ourselves. And in the knowledge that we are not alone, that God is on our side, we manage to go on. Life is not fair. The wrong people get sick and the wrong people get robbed. And the wrong people get killed in wars and in accidents. Some people see life's unfairness and decide there is no God, the world is nothing but chaos. Others see the same unfairness and ask themselves, where do I get my sense of what is fair and what is unfair? Where do I get my sense of outrage and indignation? My instinctive response of sympathy when I read the paper about a total stranger who has been hurt by life. Don't I get these things from God? Doesn't God plant in me a little bit of God's own divine outrage at injustice and oppression, just as God did for the prophets of the Bible? Isn't my feeling of compassion for the afflicted just a reflection of the compassion God feels when God sees the suffering of God's creatures? Are responding to life's unfairness with sympathy and righteous indignation is God's place in the world. I learned with Rabbi Harold Kushner. From 2010 to 2013, he and his extended family celebrated Passover at Ramat Rome, where, as many of you know, I have been for many, many, many years. He never missed a Talmud class of mine. I never missed a lecture of his. When I gave a sermon during Pesach, he would ask me to sit with him at lunch so that he could give me his notes. He was one of the best orators I had ever seen. Ever. He wove storytelling and Torah together as if his heart knew how to do nothing else but that. So when Kushner asks you to have lunch so he can talk about your sermon, you sit and you listen. And often, right next to me would be Rabbi Arntzen. We were all there together. He would do the same thing for Rabbi Arntzen. And then he would say, "What'd you think of my talk last night?" When I sit with a seriously ill patient in a hospital and pray with her, I explain that our prayer expresses our hopes for a favorable outcome. But more than that, I want the patient to know that she is ill not because God has rejected her or punished her for something. God is on her side, not on the side of illness. God is sending her doctors and nurses, endowing them with skill and sensitivity. And even at night, when the room is dark and deserted and she may feel desperately alone, she can call on God to keep her company. Asked by a television interviewer what I thought of an experiment that seemed to show that praying for people in hospitals made no difference, I told her, God's job is not to make sick people healthy. That's the doctor's job. God's job is to make sick people brave. If he would have written that and nothing else, Dayenu. Remember I told you the blasphemer? Remember we talked about the blasphemer? And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Take the blasphemer outside the camp and let all who were within the hearing lay their hands upon his head and let the whole community stone him." Among the top Google hits for Harold Kushner is an article from an Orthodox website titled, "Why Harold Kushner is Wrong." Remarkably, Kushner himself, this is in an article, Kushner himself concedes the point, acknowledging that he may be wrong about God. But drawing on thousands of letters he has received over the years from grateful readers, the vast majority of them non-Jewish, he maintains that his writing has helped restore faith, return people to prayer, and permit them to heal. He said, "I don't know if I'm correct theologically. I don't know the reality of God. What I do know is my book makes people feel better. It gives them back the ability to go to shul or church and pray, to believe in God, to believe that God is on their side. It restores to them the legitimacy of outrage when something tragic has happened to them. The legitimacy of outrage when something tragic has happened. If God did it for a reason, there is no legitimacy of outrage." You know what yesterday was in the Jewish calendar? Pesach Sheni. Pesach, the second Pesach. Speak to the Israelite people, saying, when any party, whether you or your offspring, who is defiled, meaning becomes impure by contact with a corpse, or is on a long journey and simply can't make it to the temple on Passover, They get to do it the next month on the 14th of Iyar, just like we all did it on the 14th of Nisan. That's what the Torah says. The Pesach sacrifice is totally unique because every family comes and sits outside the temple and they offer their sacrifice and then everybody eats it together at a meal. Nobody wants to miss that. So if somebody misses it, the Torah actually builds in a second chance. Come on the 14th of Iyar, the next month, and offer your sacrifice there. Rabbi Kushner, where do so many of us get the feeling that if you're not the best, you're a failure? The God I believe in, the God I pray to, the God I turn to when I am at the point of losing faith in myself is not a God who says, I gave you one chance and you blew it. How can I ever trust you again? The God I believe in says to me, I have given you an incomparably valuable gift. The ability to know the difference between good and bad, between things that should be done and things that should not be done. The freedom no other creature has to use willpower to override temptations. And when you find that too hard to do, when you stumble and fall, when you are led astray by the pleasure of the moment rather than the long-term good, I will be there to pick you up, clean you off, give you a fresh start, because I am the God of forgiveness, the God of second chances. That when you are able to forgive yourself and to forgive people around you for not being perfect, I will recognize you as my child. That's the God Kushner prayed to. That's the God I pray to. That's the God of Pesach Sheni, the second Pesach. This is why he said, we have to make room in our lives for the people who may sometimes disappoint or exacerbate us. If we hold our friends to a standard of perfection, or if they do that to us, we will end up far lonelier than we want to be. Okay, I want to finish with, I could do this all day. And I did this just from 4 of his books. I could do it all day though. This one is for us. This is what Kushner said about rabbinical school. He said, my seminary training was all about Jewish answers. My congregational experience has been more in terms of Jewish questions. My seminary training was about Jewish answers. My congregational experience is in terms of Jewish questions. I start with the anguish, the uncertainty, the lack of fulfillment I find in the lives of the very nice, decent people who are in this synagogue and who are my readers. I start with their anguish, their uncertainty, their lack of fulfillment. And Judaism is the answer. How do I live a fulfilling life is the question, says Rabbi Harold Kushner, Zichrono Livracha. How do I live a fulfilling life is the question, and Judaism is the answer. That's why we're here. Shabbat Shalom. May his memory be for a blessing always.